you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Naruto Enters Game of Thrones. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The Forgotten Son. He couldn't move. Not a finger, not a toe, not an inch. Even the act of breathing was little more than a ragged gasp. Trying to move his hands only made matters worse, because once he opened his eyes in the dim light, he realized his hands were bound, his legs as well, his body strapped to a table. Was it a table? It felt cold, too solid to be a wooden table, too dark. The air was damp. He could hear the sound of the ocean, taste the salt in the air, yet he could lift his head. The chain about his neck saw to that. Even without it he couldn't see anything at all, not a damn thing. Why was he here? Why couldn't he move? Why wasn't he dead for that matter? His last memory was of that damn Dornishman and his spear. The poison, his blood burning in his veins, the countless wounds he'd taken ... He couldn't remember anything else. He'd won, hadn't he? Sure, he hadn't been able to pop his head like a grape before he passed out, but he'd gotten a few hard punches in. That had been a good fight. He'd won, right? He remembered that stupid whore screaming as he beat her lover down. Then a weight in his head and passing out. Was this King's Landing? Didn't feel like King's Landing. Didn't smell like it, either. He could feel his heart pounding, now. He needed to move. Footsteps echoed somewhere above him. Torchlight burned away the dark. Sir Gregor Clegane. A familiar voice hummed happily. Awake at last. He growled at them with all the hate and vitriol he possessed. The hell am I? Dragonstone. The voice informed him. I apologize for the silence. It's been like this ever since Stannis abandoned it. Yusanuva. Now is that any way to speak to the man who saved your life? His savior tutted. Don't worry, you're safe. Gregor didn't feel bloody safe. He felt angry, pissed to all the hells. You're restrained for your own protection, I assure you. You have a great many wounds, and they need to heal. Someone poured a goblet of wine. He saw it, heard it. A hand offered him a cup. Thirsty, Gregor didn't want to drink. But gods, his throat was dry. His host captor waved it just under his nose, bringing with it a fragrant aroma. Drink, the man urged. I wouldn't bring you all the way here just to poison you now, would I? Fair, he supposed. Then again, thinking had never been his strong suit. He couldn't nod, but he managed a grunt. A toast. I set it to his lips and poured wine down his throat, helping him to savor each drop. Proper wine for a proper hero. Come, drink. You should be grateful. I saved you, healed you, ferried you away from danger. I even got that awful poison out of your veins. He drank greedily. After all, his host continued to pace. I wanted you to have your wits when you woke up. You, the man who made murder a pastime. Gregor nearly choked on the wine. Yes, swallow. Still the wine came, forcing him to drink or drown. Drink deeply. ... Why did he have a bad feeling about this? Brave man, aren't you? Word by word, the man's voice turned ugly, his dulcet tones souring like too much rotten honey. You butchered a woman with a babe in her belly, stomped a little girl to death, dashed an infant's skull against the wall like it was a pinata. But you weren't satisfied with that, were you? Still the wine came, nearly making him gag. You cut a mother in two, then ravaged her corpse to sate your own lust. The goblet went away, allowing to gasp for air as his captor went to refill it. You and the Lannisters killed a good many dragons that day, but you didn't slaughter every one of them. That was your mistake. A finger tapped the goblet, producing a terrible hollow sound. You should have ripped them out, root and stem. After all, when you cut off a viper's head, the viper dies. But when you take the head of a dragon, someone leaned into the torchlight. He glimpsed a hooded face, the ghost of a smile set within the cowl. ... You'd best remember the dragon has 3 heads. Just as quickly, he leaned back. I suppose you wouldn't know, would you? You were too busy raping Aaliyah Mardell to check the bodies of her children. The face leaned in again, all pretense of civility burning away. She was my mother. I didn't know her or my sister, little Reenie's, for very long. How could I, when I was just a baby? But I remember you. I remember the way you laughed when you did it. When you broke open my head. I remember that, too. The pain was the worst thing. I was small, helpless, yet aware of every moment. Dread strangled Clegane's tongue, now heavy from wine. Damn him. He growled and tried to move his arms, to twitch his fingers or toes, to bring his strength to bear and break his bonds ... But he couldn't. He could only breathe and blink. Everything felt so heavy. The wine, it must have had something in it. He was paralyzed, he realized, yet he still experienced everything. He could see and hear, think and breathe, speak and feel even, for what good it did him. Because right now he felt the icy grip of fear as he hadn't in years. No, 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 no. You're lying, you're not here. I killed you. You died. Fortunately for you, yes. A hand tugged back the hood. Unfortunately, I got better, even if my wound never quite healed right. He glimpsed a pale face bearing a violet blue eye, whiskered cheeks, pale silver hair, and an ugly scar stretching down across his temple and past his brow. Worse than what I did to Sandor, was his next thought. At least his brother still had his right eye after the burns. This one didn't. His was gone. No eye patch, not even the black one he wore could hope to hide it. The man Aegon Targaryen didn't even try. Do you have any idea what it's like to have your own head smashed in? To be left for dead? If I were any other baby, I would have died. I nearly did. He tapped his skull, showing the scar there. They threw me into a cistern. I had to crawl over a mountain of corpses, all the way down to Flea Bottom ... but that's another story. Hardly the way I wanted to live my second life, you know. I wanted to be Aegon this time around, not Naruto. You ruined that for me. But still, I lived. I survived. I thrived. I forced myself to grow. Here at last, he stopped pouring wine down his throat. And now I've come for you. 5 firm fingers gripped his chin, forcing him to look his way. After all, you know what they say. What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger or stranger. I haven't decided yet. I still hear their voices, you know. They're whispering in my ear even now, telling me to kill you. Without warning, he released him. But I won't. Not yet. First, you're going to confess your crimes. Gregor grit his teeth. Piss off. Wrong answer. A hand cracked across his face. He felt the pain, but could not move, couldn't do anything more than snarl. Do that again, and I start using my knives. He spun back to him, a wild light in his blue eye. Helia Martel, confess. You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children. You killed me. You nearly killed my uncle before I could even meet him. Oberyn lived. The gods truly hated him, didn't they? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to heal a broken skull? No, Aegon wagged a finger. Don't answer that. I had to spell all his teeth back in. He still hasn't woken up. That was, what, a week ago. The whole world thinks he's missing ... or dead. My Meister doesn't know when he'll wake up. He shrugged his shoulder once, spun in place, and grabbed him by the face. I suppose that works to my advantage. If Dorne didn't hate the Lannisters before, then they certainly do now. And all because of you. I didn't do a damn thing, you basta. Hug. He never saw the blade move, didn't even feel it until it slammed into his thigh. Confess. Aegon tilted his head. Tell me what I want to know, and all this stops. Clegane. Hate gave him strength to spit in his face. I should have killed you with your whore of a mother, Rick. A knife whistled down with liquid speed, stabbed into his groin and cut upward, warping his words into an agonized squeal. Confess. It was a command. You little shit. When I get out of here you'll pay for the eyes. Now his tormentor went to work on the fingers of his right hand. The fingernails, actually. When he was done with those he began breaking them, one by one, smallest to largest. It was too much pain, agony compounded with his own lifeblood pooling beneath him. And all the while that word hammered at him. Confess. Trapped within a misery of his own making, Sir Gregor Clegane broke. I did it. Helia Martel. He confessed for only the second time in his life, but now he found himself utterly powerless. I did it all. Everything you said. Just fucking ... kill me. Get it over with already. Silence stretched through the cavern. Death never came. Here, the man who called himself Naruto, and Aegon tilted his head. Now, a shit-eating grin stretched across his face. Today, you're not going to die for a very long time, Clegane. A pale hand patted his head in a soothing, almost patronizing caress. First you're going to lose your legs, then your arms. After that, a nose, and maybe an eye if I'm feeling creative. Your wounds will be cauterized each time. I won't let you bleed out. If you refuse to eat, I'll shove food down your throat. And of course, if you try to bite off your tongue. He looked past him and whistled. Something uttered a low, raspy hiss in the dark behind him. It had been still and silent all this time. Asleep. No longer. Now it awoke. Gregor heard it move, felt the hot breath against his face, and he still couldn't bloody move. The beast was darker than obsidian, his scales a deep ebony that seemed to shimmer in the low light. Yet its eyes were molten amber. It was large, the largest thing he'd ever seen in his life. It was a bloody dragon. That wasn't right. That couldn't be right. Why was a dragon here? What's that saying your Lannister masters are so fond of? Aegon thumbed a whiskered cheek as that winged doom crept closer. Hear me roar. Yes, that's the one. Ankalagan. He looked past him to the black behemoth looming large over them. Show this Lannister dog what we think of their words. The beast screamed. It was a sound that seemed to swallow the world. Everything Gregor Clegane was. Fetid air blasted his face, could see his life ending in those jaws. He almost wished it would. That would be a quick end. Not this. Naruto raised a hand and the beast fell silent. I know what you're thinking. But as you can see, the mother of dragons in Meereen isn't the only one with dragons. Aegon prattled on. I hatched my good friend here a while ago. He ran a hand along its snout, drawing a pleased trill from the titanic beast. In the Shadowlands of Asai. He grew quickly, of course. I fed him Dothraki screamers, sellswords, idiot knights, anyone foolish enough to get in our way. When he was large enough, I flew him across the narrow sea to Dragonstone. He hasn't left since. He grinned. Wouldn't do to ruin the surprise, no. After all, he's still growing. Gregor howled at him. Damn you. Damn you to all the seven hells. Now, there's no need to be rude. If you're going to swear, I'll just have to use this. The Targaryen stuffed a gag into his mouth to silence his cries. There, isn't that much better? Gregor howled imprecations at his captor, but he madman didn't seem to care. You know, I really shouldn't have kidnapped you, but I just couldn't help myself. I was in King's Landing, I saw a chance, and I took it. I think my uncle would have approved if you hadn't killed him. Gregor kept screaming even through the gag. He could see that awful dragon circling him, its great head bending low, scenting his blood. Any second now. Dead men tell no tales, you know, but the damn dragon spawn wasn't finished with him, not yet. I just love the smell of fear. I wonder what Tywin Lannister will be like. I can't wait to see his stunned face when he see Ankalagan. Do you think he'll be surprised, shocked, afraid? Screaming availed him not. Gregor started mumbling prayers. Are you praying? Alia Martell's last mad son tutted softly, and here at last, that ever-present smile slipped. Don't bother, your gods are dead. Your master will be soon enough once my aunt crosses the narrow sea. And for you, he stepped aside, making way for his dragon on the altar. This is your god now. Ankalagan loomed large over him, massive jaws parting wide. Gregor's eyes bulged. He whimpered, begged for mercy behind the gag. None came. The Dragon King lunged, giant jaws closing around Gregor's left leg. Flesh tore, sinew parted, blood spattered the floor. Screams of wordless agony filled the night. And so the mountain crumbled. Oberyn awoke with a start. He almost wished he hadn't, if only because of his head. Such a headache he had. It felt like a mountain was trying to crush his skull. The trial by combat. He'd died, hadn't he? He jolted upright with a gasp, swearing like a sailor. Mistakes were made. Many mistakes. And they were his. The very instant he rose, his head protested violently, the pain in his skull such that he couldn't think, let alone speak. It was too much movement far too soon. His body buckled, his feet failed him, and he crashed down to the floor with a groan. Through bleary eyes he beheld a door on the far side of the room. It swung open on old creaky hinges, allowing him to glimpse a pair of dark boots. He must have blacked out at some point, because he awoke to find himself in a bed. Bed. He remembered no such bed. This room was drab and dreary and so very dull, not at all what he had grown accustomed to. Everything seemed carved from dark stone, with few comforts beyond the bed in which he found himself. As he lay there, reeling from the pain, he began to hear things, smell things, the crashing of the waves, the salt of the sea. The fading light of day spilled in through the slit of the window, yet he heard no shouts of sailor or anyone outside, which in turn implied an island. Dragonstone, he realized. This place could only be Dragonstone. Why in the seven hells was he on Dragonstone? This time he rose more warily, carefully, unwilling to test himself. His forehead ached still, but the pain proved bearable provided he didn't move quickly. Etch, he muttered under his breath. It feels like a woman crushed my head between her thighs. She must have been quite the woman, then. The Prince of Dorne rounded on the voice as best he could, given his current condition. A boy with distinct Targaryen features sat in a chair opposite him on the far side of the room, book in hand. He had the distinctive look of their kind, to be sure, yet also that of a Dornishman, for his skin was not quite that ghastly, ghostly pallor of those who came before. One eye lay covered by a heavy black eye patch, while it concealed that which he'd lost. It did nothing to hide the scars on his skull. The other eye gleamed a bright violet blue, the truest of dragons, and it was focused solely upon him. There was something haunting about that gaze, almost familiar. His host smiled at him as he set the book down. Hello, Uncle. So nice to finally meet you. How are you feeling, Uncle? Very few people in this world could call Oberyn Martell such, even less of them men. His throat went dry and his tongue felt heavy in his mouth. Am I dead? No. The young man shook his head, but not for lack of trying. Who are you? You know who I am. The young man rose from his chair, walked to his bedside, and sat beside him. I just told you. Yes, he'd hinted at much. It was also impossible, for it couldn't be. It could not possibly be. Aegon, the only son of his dear sister Alia. Here, alive. Prove yourself. He fumbled at the words. Prove you're who you claim to be. It sounded foolish even as he said it. Evidently the boy agreed. How can I? He fixed him with a stern look. I was just a baby when last we met. I barely remember you. Although, a wistful expression tugged at the corner of his mouth. I recall mother wouldn't give me to the wet nurse. She shouted and raged when they tried to feed me themselves. You found that funny? She wouldn't let anyone else touch me. Yes, Oberyn swallowed thickly. She had to feed you herself. His eyes stung. How did you survive? He'd never seen the bodies, not even the remains. The Lannisters had not allowed it. Oh, the rage he'd felt. The fury. He wanted to believe that this boy might be his nephew, but how could he be certain? It was the uncertainty that gnawed at him, filling him with doubt. I didn't survive. I died. A hand traced his scarred skull and Oberyn found himself wincing at the old wound. A lesser man would have died from such. They bashed my head against a wall and threw me into a pile of corpses to rot with the rest. I dragged myself back, but there was a price. An unseen weight seemed to settle around his slim shoulders as he palmed his face. I'm not whole. I spent a lifetime getting here and sometimes I still hear their voices, their screams in my dreams. He sounded so broken in that instant that any hesitation Oberyn might have felt melted away. There, my dear boy. He drew him into his arms and held him tight as family should, held him close. This last living piece of his dear, sweet sister. It is all right now. None will harm you. Any fool who raises a hand against you will have it cut off at the wrist. That drew a rusty laugh from Elia's son. I can defend myself, you know. Just ask the mountain. Oberyn's world narrowed to a single point. You killed him. He's currently missing both his legs, one arm, and an eye. Aegon leaned back and counted off on one hand, smiling softly. Death is a mercy. He isn't going to die for a very long time. If you listen closely enough, you can hear him screaming down in the dungeons. And you did all this to him by yourself. Aegon's grin grew. It was Oberyn's only warning. A low rumble rattled the room. No, the very keep. From top to bottom, Oberyn stilled, baffled by the sudden noise. What was that? His nephew grinned. Would you like to see? See, he did. Oberyn saw the tail first as Aegon guided him down the steps to the beach, a massive jagged thing flecked by sea and salt bearing a great many spikes. His gaze followed that tail, watching it widen until it finally rejoined the great black behemoth of a beast sprawled on the beach. It was sunning itself, rumbling softly as it slumbered. An honest-to-goodness dragon lay before them, resting on the beaches of Dragonstone. It felt like he'd stepped out of reality and into the age of heroes. Large did not even begin to describe this gorgeous beast. Nor was it the same as most worms. It possessed 4 limbs like any proper dragon, yet they were separate from its wingspan. He could see those tucked against broad shoulders, dragging in the sand. This beast could both rend with its mighty claws and fly at the time, breathing fire all the while. This was Balerion reborn. A beast like this could conquer the 7 kingdoms, bathe the world in fire and blood. It would bring darkness and death and despair wherever it went. Such a thought made him shiver. He's still growing. Oberyn made a choked noise and rounded on his nephew for the casual remark. And how do you know this? I hatched him myself. Aegon chided. Trust me, I know. ... He did, didn't he? The boy spoke with such surety that he couldn't help but believe him. Aegon led him closer still, until the beast absolutely dwarfed them. The boy felt no fear, for he ran a hand across the beast's flank. He heard his nephew mutter something in High Valyrian, then with it, a name. Ankalagan. Time to wake up, sleepyhead. And the darkness stirred. Oberyn was a brave man. He had stared death in the face many a time and each time told it not today more than once. But today he felt a bleak touch of fear as the first dragon to return to Westeros shifted with a ponderous rumble, sand sloughing from his body. The beast shook itself and turned, glaring down at them. A hot rush of warm air burst from his nostrils, briefly blasting their hair back. Such a beast. It could swallow the both of them in a single gulp. Aegon grinned up at his partner and caught his snout, running one hand under his chin. Don't worry. He won't hurt you. Not him, perhaps, but others most certainly. Another, uglier thought occurred to Oberyn then. If this beast burned the world, it would burn Dorne as well. I must go home, he said. Will you come with me? I'd rather not. His nephew didn't look too keen on the idea as he stroked his mount. I'd rather stay here until my aunt crosses the narrow sea. Daenerys. A pang of confusion ran through Oberyn. You are certain she will? I've seen it. His nephew nodded. The dream was clearer than a memory. No one knows I'm here. No one cares about Dragonstone. I'd prefer to keep the secrecy. That could change. The lad caught his hidden meaning. I don't want the throne. I only want vengeance, I know. He clasped his shoulder. For your mother and sister. The Iron Throne would help you achieve that. Ankalagan will help. He bit back. A chair won't. An army will. Came the counter. Or do you intend to raise the entire 7 kingdoms alone? Not all the kingdoms. Aegon let Ankalagan go, allowing the dragon to settle back to the sands with a sleepy sigh. Just the Lannisters. No, no, no. This would not do. His nephew had a purpose, a destiny. Surely he had not walked through fire and death to just cast his rights aside. He had a dragon, for crying out loud. You are the rightful heir. He circled round him, the better to face him fully. A bastard boy born of incest rules in King's Landing. Without Tywin Lannister he is nothing. And we have a Lannister of our own in the Water Gardens. That got his attention. You do. Cersei's only daughter, Michella. He was loath to give up such information, but he had his eye now. She is a sweet young thing, engaged to my brother's son. Confusion warred with disgust on his face. Eventually the latter won out, wedding a Lannister to a Martell. What were you thinking? Oberyn raised a hand to forestall his ire. It was not my arrangement. Blame the imp ... if he lives. He does. He escaped across the narrow sea before his execution. Ah, that was good. It would have been a shame had he died. Aegon blew out an angry breath. This Michella ... does she love Tristan? It occurred to him that he might lie here. His nephew might even thank him for it. But no, they did not hurt little girls in Dorne. When last I was there, Aegon made an irritated noise and stormed away down the beach. Oberyn limped after him. The current weakness of his body disgusted him, but he acknowledged how close he'd come to death. It would take the better part of several months before he was fit enough to fight again. Time enough for the coming rebellion, hopefully. His nephew was wavering. He could sense it. No. Aegon shook his head at last, dashing that beautiful hope for the time being. Daenerys can have her chair. She's earned it. I haven't. I'd be a terrible ruler. He touched one hand to his face, concealing his good eye. I'm only good for breaking things now. So was Meager, and he brought the faith militant to heel. A bark of bitter laughter burst out of the boy. I very much doubt we'll have to deal with their like anytime soon. Even so, my point remains. You need an army, nephew, or all of your vengeance will be for naught. He could hear Aegon grinding his teeth. Meet with my brother. And so he gave him a gentle nudge. Doran will rally Dorne to your cause. I assure you, he has been waiting for a moment like this for a very long time. One day. The boy held up a finger. I'll go to Dorne for one day. Then I'm coming back. Success. He sketched a bow. As you command, your grace. Aegon thumped him on the back. And stop calling me that. Dorne received few visitors these days. It was something of a shame, but he understood why, even if he didn't much appreciate. Life was cruel, as were the gods. No one in Dorne wished to look upon a prince, much less a prince of Dorne, who could barely leave his chair. The beauty of the Water Gardens, once something he reveled in as a boy, could only ever be experienced from afar now. Seen but never experienced, heard, yet never truly touched. The gout had nigh but taken his legs already. It was a struggle to walk even with assistance and a cane. Soon it would become impossible to stand altogether. One day, he would likely be unable to leave his bed entirely. Was this his fate? To simply sit by and watch Dorne tear itself in two. For you see, Doran had a plan, a grand scheme, but it all seemed so pointless now. There was no word on the Mother of Dragons. His spies had told him she fled from Meereen in the midst of an ambush, and his hopes of rebellion went with her. His plan required a Targaryen, and she was the last. Without her, without a symbol to rally behind, Dorne's plans were destined to die a stillbirth. Valeria was not helping matters on that front, in part because she was torn as well. Torn between the loss of her lover and her duty to Dorne. He no longer knew what she wanted, and that worried him. She had not said a word to him to anyone since Oberyn's disappearance. She often stood beside him these days, yet said nothing. Where his dear brother, where he had been taken, no one knew. He had been bested in a trial by combat, and his wounds were great. But his body had never been recovered, nor had that of the mountain, if word was to be believed. The Lannisters were likely to blame for that, another sin they would pay for in the fullness of time, but he needed a way to move forward, and soon, or all was lost. Wait, what was that noise? He heard something just now, a steady whump 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 like the pounding of distant drums out for blood. Doran sat straighter in his chair, squinting up into the cloud-stricken sky. He saw nothing, and yet the noise only grew louder and louder. Where was it coming from? Below his feet? No, that wouldn't make any sense. His spies had reported no army massing at the gates. So then where? A roar rattled the world as a winged shadow punched through the clouds to darken the Water Gardens. Someone screamed. Dorne never knew who. Dragon. Nevertheless, his old heart nearly stopped at the sight as much as the sound, because in an instant he saw a great black beast swooped out of the skies. Men and women screamed. The wise ones fled. A great many more stopped and stared as their doom drew near. As he looked on aghast, the beast, this dragon, circled the courtyard once with dark grace, then swooped low to land. It did so at speed, uncaring of the hedges it tramped, the people it frightened, nor the walls that crumbled under its talons. The beast lumbered forward at them with a snarl, baring its fangs at the three of them. The roar that followed proved even louder than the last, nearly deafening all present. Dorne steeled himself. Dorne had never bowed to dragonfire before, but times had changed, and those jaws were large indeed. Ariohata raised his mighty axe, ready to fight to the end even in the face of impossible odds. Dorne waved him down. Go, he hissed. Hide Michella. Quickly, if that was a Targaryen atop that dragon, and he could only assume it was, they would not react kindly to seeing a Lannister here. But there was no need. Ellaria shrieked suddenly, a sound equal parts joy and disbelief. At first, Dorne didn't understand, but then he did. Because there, sliding off the dragon's back with liquid ease, as if he'd been born there. Ellaria, my dear. A familiar voice rang out. Why ever did you cut your hair? Oberyn. It was him. His brother looked tired and pale, haggard in a way he hadn't been before, but this was undoubtedly his kin. Ellaria evidently agreed, because she launched herself at Oberyn like an arrow loosed from a bow. His brother caught her by the hips, but that sent him stumbling back against the dragon's wing, and there was nowhere left for him to go. Then she was on him, welding her lips to his, kissing him fiercely. The laughter that followed was every bit his brother. I told you I wouldn't leave you alone. And there behind him, just now disembarking the dragon, an actual dragon. Who was that? Dorne saw the pale hair and sucked in a sharp breath. Had the mother of dragons flown to Westeros already? But no, this was no woman. Here stood a young man clad in dark leathers wearing an eye patch, and no other dragons had yet to materialize. He landed nimbly beside Oberyn, turned just long enough to touch a hand to the dragon's jaws, and whispered something to the beast. Rusty though his high Valyrian was, the prince caught one word. Fly. It spurred the dragon to move. He shrugged his shoulders as his wings beat down. Once, twice, thrice, each kicking up a great shockwave in its wake. With a bounding leap and a pleased cry, the terror was airborne once, hurtling away into the clouds. Dorne spared a moment of pity for the whales on the coast. He suspected the pods would be running thin after today. But there were far more important questions afoot. And who are you? Beloved brother. Oberyn's smirk was nothing short of smug, his bow even more so, as he somehow managed to do both without releasing a stricken Ellaria. May I present his grace, Aegon Targaryen, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, Prince of Dragonstone ... and Dragonlord. Hey, the boy ruined it by thumping him on the back. I told you not to call me that. Forgive me, nephew. His brother's smile said otherwise. I could not resist. Ellaria perked up. What did you just say? Dorne's mind fizzled. Nephew. Aegon looked to Ellaria, suddenly curious. Which would make you my ... aunt? Ellaria's face was a study of contrasts. You saved my Oberyn. Well, it took some doing, but yes. You sweet boy. His brother's paramour needed no further prodding. She dove on the Targaryen boy in a swirl of silk, kissed his forehead, and hauled him into her arms, babbling happily all the while. For his part, Aegon didn't fight it. He seemed more amused than anything else. He watched the young man close his eye for a moment and lean into her with a content sigh. It was the look of one who had far too few embraces in his lifetime. Dorne tried to speak. He failed. Aegon did it for him, leaning past Ellaria with a small sad smile. Nice to finally meet you face to face. You must be Dorne. I am. He loathed himself for how weak he sounded in this crucial, pivotal moment. It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Could this truly be his nephew? He exchanged a long, lingering look with Oberyn and received nod from him. Gods be good, but he wanted to believe. Miracles were in short supply these days, especially for Dorne. And you as well. His good eye flicked down to regard Dorne's useless limbs. He hummed. Oberyn was right about your legs. Before Dorne could think to ask what he meant, this Aegon laid a hand on of them, said palm pulse gold, accompanied by a faint tingling in his limbs. The sensation spread, slowly at first, then with vigor, until he felt his toes begin to twitch. It ... was not an unpleasant sensation, as if his feet had simply been asleep all this time, not in pain. As a matter of fact, he didn't feel any pain at all, presently. What wonders never cease. There, his nephew withdrew just as quickly, wearing a small smile. That should help ease the gout. You'll be better in a few days. What manner of magic is this? Sure, Aegon smiled. Magic, let's call it that. A cascade of emotions hit Dorne. To have his family reunited and his legs restored in the span of only a few minutes. It was too much. Too sudden. Too fast. He couldn't bring himself to answer beyond a humbled thanks. Come, for once Oberyn played the good host and took Aegon by the arm. There is much to discuss. I will take you to see your cousins in the meantime. That got Aegon's attention. I have cousins. Oberyn's smile proved wan by comparison. Indeed you do. Though I will warn you, they are willful girls. You may not like them at first. Oberyn was right. He did not. It ended with those cousins sprawled in the sand like their namesake. Oberyn had been right. Naruto didn't like them. He'd tried. He really had. But he couldn't. Perhaps as Aegon he ought to, or should have at least made the effort. But these sand snakes rubbed him the wrong way the moment they met. These young girls, foolish girls, arrogant girls, they didn't think much of him. He rectified that. Now they lay sprawled at his feet, licking their wounds after a thorough beating. He looked away from them into the sky. Ankalagan wheeled overhead, never far from him. He could feel the dragon's impatience. It was one he shared. They'd spent too much time here already. Whatever his heritage, they didn't belong here. This was not his home. Oberyn would speak to Dorne about rallying an army, politics, and all of that pish. He would be glad to be rid of this place and go back to Dragonstone. Rid of this place, and that odd, innocent Lannister girl who kept watching him from the shadows. He'd been avoiding Michella Lannister, if only because he didn't want to vent his wrath on her. Yet still she watched. No, don't think about that. The youngest of the sand snakes glowered his way from where she lay, earning his attention once more, if only just. What the hell are you? Better than you three. He dusted his trousers off with a sigh. Far better. They hadn't been able to touch him. Not at once. Not Nymeria with her whip, Obara her spear, nor Tyene with her daggers. And really those names. They whined and complained, acting as if it weren't fair. Wasn't it? They'd picked this fight. They could be so much more, so much better than they were, yet they reduced themselves to this. Almost sad, really. Listen to yourselves. You speak of vengeance, yet you have no idea of what it is. But you will. He flipped Tyene's dagger over in his gloved hand and offered it to her, hilt first. Stay in Dorne. You are not ready. Tyene tried to attack him, of course. Anyone would after an insult like that, truth or not. He caught her by the wrist and flung her down, disgusted by her weakness. Stop that. You are proud daughters of Dorne. Act like it or I swear I'll kill you where you stand. Nymeria snarled. This from a coward who refuses to be king. A single punch made her eat those arrogant words. Quite literally, in fact. This again. I could claim the throne ... if I wanted it. Naruto rolled one shoulder in a shrug as she pitched back, clutching her bloaty nose. But I won't. Tyene hissed at him. It is your birthright. So everyone keeps telling me. He looked to the skies and whistled. I still won't claim it. Ankalagan heard him and wheeled down towards them. Obara spat at his feet. Coward. A sweep of the legs made her eat that wet sand. The other two didn't dare to get up after that. Were they trying to rile him up? How pathetic. He felt nothing more for these girls, these so-called cousins of his. Neither anger nor hate, nor wait, he told a lie. Pity. Naruto felt pity. He pitied them and their small views, their small world, their inability to see beyond it all. Just pity. A wise man knows what he is suited for, and what he is not. He raised a hand when Tyene made to protest. It doesn't matter. I'm headed back to Dragonstone soon, and you'll never see me again. Why go back there? Ankalagan crashed down beside him and roared her into silence. Always with the questions, this one. To wait for the queen, he said, climbing onto his back. Why else would I return? She scoffed. The seven kingdoms have no queen. He grinned at them. Not yet, but they will. Daenerys heard the dragon before she saw it. A massive shadow passed over the fleet. A roar rattled the world. She found herself balked at the extraordinary shape, eyes wide, lips parting. What ... is that? Whatever it was flying back to Dragonstone. No, she knew what it was, even as her dragons, her children, called out greetings of their own. Dragons had returned to Westeros. Something else was waiting for them at Dragonstone. Someone she did not expect. She'd seen the dragon outside, the same beast that was even now roosting atop the castle with Drogon, Regal and Viserion. She hadn't known what to make of that. The beast hadn't made an aggressive move towards them, and she was likewise loath to attack something so large in the first place. It didn't make a lick of sense. Varys and the rest seemed just as surprised to see it. That was her sole solace in the matter. But what she found within was another matter. Sprawled in its throne, a young man clad in dark blue leathers and an eye patch awaited her. He was scribbling in a book of some kind, a journal perhaps, paying them absolutely no heed. She took in his Valyrian features at a glance and felt her throat close. No, that wasn't possible. Tyrion coughed. The young man looked up ... and smiled. Hello, Aunt. He snapped the book and looked up at her. You're late. Still, it's so nice to finally meet you. Welcome to my home. She wasn't prepared for him to vault off the throne, walk up to her and give her a hug. His arms tightened around with such a desperate need that she couldn't help but pity him. His chin came down on her shoulder and she heard him exhale in a long, relieved sigh. He drew back, holding her shoulders with a smile. Did you bring your dragons? I hope you brought your dragons. And you are. She didn't miss his wince. You don't know who I am. Then he recovered. Well, of course you don't. We never met. It's me, Aegon, your nephew. Daenerys reared back. Mad. That was her first thought of him. He was absolutely mad. Or was he to court a dragon? Nephew. She had a nephew. How in the seven hells did she have a nephew? Daenerys was still struggling to make sense of it all. Come next morning, she avoided her council and broke her fast alone in her chambers, the better to master her emotions in relative privacy. Needless to say, she failed spectacularly. Now her entire venture was in danger of doing just that, failing. It was unacceptable. Not having a nephew, his presence didn't bother her so much as the possibility of what said nephew might represent. His very existence threatened to undermine all that she'd fought so hard to achieve. It all made a twisted sort of sense, really. Dorne had been awfully determined to work with her, eager even on Lord Oberyn's part. At the time she'd foolishly assumed their cause was vengeance against the Lannisters. Now she knew the truth. She didn't know how her nephew had survived. She wasn't sure she wanted to. He was missing an eye and the scars on his head told a story all their own. There could be no denying his Targaryen blood either. Ankalagan gods, what a name for such a terrifying beast, proved his claim more than any blood might. Unfortunately, that left Daenerys at something of a crossroads. She had come to Westeros with two goals in mind. Take the Iron Throne. She would seize what was rightfully hers, destroy those who had senselessly slaughtered her family, then break the wheel. Then she would rule and come what may. It all seemed so simple. In hindsight, she should have known better. Nothing was simple in this world. If it wasn't difficult enough to wrap her head around, there was also the matter of the dragon. How anyone could command such a fearsome beast was beyond her. Aegon was certainly bold enough and also unafraid of her. Attractive qualities in a potential partner, no. Bad brain, not the time. But her mind dwelt on it still. When was the last someone she'd received a hug like that? No ulterior motives, no slavish devotion. No fear of what she might do if he upset her. Just the simple joy of one relative meeting another. Simple and clean. It felt nice. And yet if her nephew took it into his head to stake his claim over hers, most would say it was a better one with a dragon that large. It would not end well for her. Could she sway him somehow? With what? She had nothing he wanted. Nothing he might want but herself. Wait. He valued family. Could she not seduce him, then? Did she even want to? The thought roiled her stomach. She hadn't genuinely tried to love someone since no, don't think about Drogo. It had been so long since the death of her son and stars, yet she still felt his absence keenly. Her heart ached when she thought of him. There were times when she feared that wound may never heal. But he would want her to live to be happy. And the question remained, could she woo this boy? Her nephew had a terribly large dragon at his command and he clearly wasn't afraid to use it as she wished. She outnumbered him 3-1 in terms of armies and dragons. Her children might be able to best him in a pitched battle, but they might not. Ankalagan was a monster unlike anything she'd ever seen. He'd been hatched long before her children and it showed. Drogon, Regal, and Viserion meant everything to her. The very world. She did not wish to throw away their lives, certainly not in a battle they had no chance of winning. Which brought Daenerys back to her initial question one last time. There could be no avoiding it. She stood and considered herself in the mirror. Could she win him over somehow? Again, did she want to? Whatever his madness, Aegon was no simpleton. He would not be led to bed like some lust-filled mutt. She knew that, had realized it from her first meeting. If she were to attempt such a feat, they must be as equals and nothing less. He would not accept being subordinate to her ... and frankly, she'd be disappointed if he did. Dragons were not slaves. ... Well, she certainly wouldn't gain anything by hiding away like this. Gathering up her wits, Daenerys drew herself up, smoothed down her gown, and took a deep breath to steel herself. From there it was a simple matter to ask Missandei to draw a bath. Her dear friend knew something was amiss, but she didn't ask, bless her. Instead she took her time, helping her scrub herself down. It had been a long voyage and she would need to look her best for this. Together they fixed her hair, then waited for it to dry in record time. From there she chose her best outfit, the dark one with the silver dragon head chain, the very same she'd wore when she first set foot upon Westeros just yesterday. She needed to, she must, look every bit a queen when she broached this subject with him. Missandei touched a hand to her arm, hummed once, and let her go. Good luck, your grace. On a whim, Daenerys drew her into a brisk hug. Luck, she said. Gods be good. But she was going to need it. The young dragon cornered him by the cliffs. Tyrion had been expecting such an encounter, of course. Even then he wasn't quite prepared for the intensity in the young man's gaze. The bad blood between their families ran deep. He wouldn't be surprised if Aegon tried to throw him into the sea here and now. Or perhaps he'd feed him to his dragon. In all honesty, he'd much rather take the sea. Which was why it came as something of a shock when Rhaegar Targaryen's last living son planted a hand on his shoulder and smiled. I wanted to thank you, Tyrion. Oh, dear, this boded poorly. Whatever for. Aegon hummed happily. For not killing your sister ... or your father. I beg your pardon. Tyrion's very soul stilled. I'm afraid you must be mistaken. I put 2 crossbow bolts in him. I assure you, he swallowed once to master the utter surge of dread. He's quite dead. No, Aegon shook his head. He lived, so you have my thanks. Now I can put both their heads on a spike. He lived. Of course he did. Father was just the sort to survive out of spite. How certain of this are you? Quite certain. Aegon's smile was telling. He's busy dealing with fallout your idiot sister caused. A destroyed sept, faith militant, a dead queen, and a king throwing himself from his balcony. He clicked his tongue. Nasty bit of business, that. Why, your dear family might tear itself apart before we even reach the capital. I hope they don't. The wind picked up as the faintest note of excitement threaded its way through his voice. That would ruin the fun. Tyrion followed his gaze. He could see the dragons wheeling in the sky, and beyond them, dark storm clouds on the horizon. If it was an omen, it was a poor one for the Lannisters. This boded poorly. Daenerys he could counsel restraint towards on a good day, but this young man loathed all Lannisters, and he wouldn't be happy until, well, heads, spikes, walls, and all that. Tyrion wasn't nearly so cavalier. He didn't want to see his family destroyed, any more than they already were. But what choice did he have? I can't help but notice you failed to mention Jaime. Why should I? Aegon's good eye squinted his way. He killed Dany's father, not mine. Aerys was mad. Your Kingslayer brother hasn't done anything to me ... yet. Tyrion prayed Jaime wouldn't. Is there anything else? Actually, there is. He withdrew a heavy scroll from his belt. Your niece wrote to you from Dorne. Viecella. He hadn't heard hide nor hair of her. At least she was safe from all this madness. No one would trouble her in the south. Thank you. You're welcome. And one last thing. Aegon granted him a thin smile. This one did not reach his eye. Tell Varys not to do anything stupid. I'd hate to burn him alive. Someone coughed behind them. Am I interrupting? Finding her nephew proved a smidgen more difficult than Daenerys expected. If only because she didn't bloody know where he'd wandered off to. Mercifully, she encountered neither Varys nor Tyrion during her search. Perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps they had gone out of their way to avoid her. Also for the best. The Red Woman from last night was nowhere to be seen as well. She must have departed to parts unknown. Daenerys couldn't blame her. She'd delivered her message, asked, begged, really her to summon Jon Snow, and moved on. She confessed a certain curiosity toward this king in the north and had sent a raven. But it and he wouldn't arrive for some time. For now there were more pressing matters to which she must attend. Eventually she found Aegon on the cliffs with Tyrion. They were talking, or rather, Aegon was the one doing the talking, and Tyrion seemed terrified of him. ... Why did that reassure her so? Because it meant they weren't plotting against her. Was she truly that petty? The thought shamed her dearly. She coughed into a fist. Am I interrupting? Not at all. Tyrion seized upon her intrusion like a drowning man would driftwood, desperate to escape. He waddled her way quickly, pausing just long enough to whisper her way. Careful, he warned her. He's in a rather bloodthirsty mood. She offered him a genial smile. Dragons often are. Tyrion heaved a sigh. Your Grace, please. What did you discuss? Her hand grimaced and clasped both hands behind his back. I wish to sound him out on the matter of our invasion. Our, is it? She bridled a little at that. I still disagree with your plan. My queen, there will be bloodshed no matter what we do. My hope is that we can at least limit it. If we encircle the capital with our armies, we can. Aegon scoffed where he stood, not looking at either of them. Sure, might as well take Casterly Rock for all the good that will do you. Tyrion's lips formed a thin line. The young dragon made an annoyed noise but said nothing more. Daenerys waved a hand. ... You may go. Tyrion bowed curtly. Please consider what I said, your grace. Be yourself, you do not wish to be queen of the ashes. His words were genuine. For now, she'd be watching him. She looked to Aegon. Her nephew stood with his back to her, not looking her way. Instead he chose to watch her dragons circle high in the skies above the bay. Ankalagan had actually deigned to join them this time. Together the four of them seemed to be conducting some sort of bizarre aerial dance, swooping and diving, wheeling through cloud banks only to re-emerge perilously close to one another. The sight made Dany's heart clench. She could imagine them spewing flame, Ankalagan crushing them within his claws. No, that at least she had to avoid at all costs. Her children must live. She couldn't bear to lose a single one of them, which meant she had to think. She had to think fast to make this work, or risk losing all she'd achieved. Her children, her friends, her armies, perhaps even her life if she did something spectacularly stupid. Not that she would, of course. She wasn't mad. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not here. Not with him. ... You can come closer if you like. Aegon rumbled a low laugh, airy and free of all cares. I'm not going to bite. He's older than me, she realized, scrutinizing him. He was born before I was, by at least a year. Yet he looked so small now. Tired, downright exhausted, even. A thought occurred to her. She had gone through hell to reach Westeros, there could be no denying that. But Aegon looked to have suffered trials of his own, far earlier than she. They'd marred him in ways she couldn't quite comprehend. He could have been so much worse. Yet here was, talking pleasantly with her. She didn't want to use him. He might well be the only kin she had left in this rotten world. And yet she couldn't afford to leave him alone, either. To do so would be folly. Her enemies and maybe even her advisors would use her against him. Daenerys sighed. ... What do you want, exactly? The man who may or may not be her nephew granted her a small, sad smile as he watched the dragons dance in the sky. Is a family so much to ask? Both of us should be dead, yet here we are, alive. Against all odds. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. He turned to face her at the last. There must be a reason we met here. ... It was a tempting prospect. Having another dragon rider would only strengthen her cause. Her brow furrowed. She had to ask. And you don't want the throne? He scoffed aloud. Stupid iron chair, so that's a no. She nearly laughed aloud. Why? Aegon shook his head. I'm mad. He spread his arms as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. You don't want a lunatic on the throne. Not alone at any rate. Look what happened to your father. He didn't have anyone to keep him in check and he went absolutely insane. No wonder the entire realm turned against him. I'd prefer to avoid that fate. I'd make a damn good enforcer, but a king. His words quickened her pulse. Was he suggesting? You're good with your words. He shrugged one shoulder. Good at winning people to your side. Your allies love you. Most folks fear me. Yes, she could see it now. What was the euphemism Sir Barristan used? The velvet glove and the iron fist. She could be the carrot and Aegon the stick. It was a dynamic that had served rulers well in the past, just as the first Aegon, their forefather, had used. Mercy and gifts aplenty were granted unto those who knelt, while their enemies were utterly destroyed. The same approach might well work to their advantage. Destiny knocked. Daenerys answered. Then he wouldn't object to marrying me. There, she'd said it. Bind her claim to his and him to her. Aegon blinked. He blinked hard. Pardon, this was it. All or nothing, then. She stepped to him. We are Targaryens. Her fingers threaded through his, palm pressed against palm. The last of our line. We could tear one another apart, here and now, but who would that serve? Our enemies. He answered before she could. But his hands were warm. Still, this is kinda sudden, you know. I'm flattered, but I'll need to sleep on it. Even so, he didn't let go of her hands. If anything, they held tight and she found herself squeezing them in return. For what it's worth, I don't want to fight you, either. I never did, not after. His face lit up suddenly. I almost forgot. His grin was so pure, so guileless that she froze for a second. Got a gift for you? There's something I want to show you. Follow me. Still grinning, Aegon took her by the hand, bold boy, and tugged her back toward the castle. Despite his haste, her nephew didn't walk in front of or behind her, but beside her. As an equal might. Daenerys found herself appreciating the difference. It seemed a small thing to fuss about, but it did much to endear him to her regardless. Oh dear, this was going to be trouble, wasn't it? She'd meant theirs to be a purely political alliance. But perhaps, come on. He lengthened his stride, forcing her to match him or be left behind. Almost there, now. Her brow furrowed. Where are you taking me? ... Like I said, there's something I want to show you. Down he led her, into the very bowels of the castle. By the time he realized where Aegon was taking her, they'd already reached the dungeons. Set near the caves of Dragonstone itself, she couldn't help but wonder at their purpose. This space was massive. Why put cells here in the first place? Almost any dragon could fit in such a space, perhaps even Ankalagan himself. Had the dragon lords of old burned their enemies here? Here, Aegon fished a ring of keys fro his belt, slotted one into the lock, and opened a door. My gift to you. A dim torch burned within, illuminating a large slab of stone. He led her inside, and she saw the thing strapped to the slab. Kill ... me ... The wheezing entity within could barely be called human anymore. He was missing both legs, an arm, and an eye besides, his boy littered with festering wounds. He was massive, tall and well-muscled if not necessarily strong these days. Her heart did a painful flip in her chest. Was this who she thought it was? Aegon let go of her hand and stepped aside. May I present Sir Gregor Clegane, Tywin Lannister's Mad Mountain ... or what's left of him. The mountain was a mess, but he still lived. His good eye flicked their way, pink and bloodshot. No more, please. Her throat closed. This is the man who dashed my skull in, killed my sister and my mother. Aegon continued apace, speaking over his pleas. He wrapped our bodies in a red cloak and threw them down before Robert Baratheon and Tywin Lannister. The usurper laughed at us and had us thrown in a midden. I had to crawl my way out. He pressed something into her palms. Daenerys looked down and found herself holding a wicked knife. She looked up at him. Why haven't you killed this beast? Because death is a mercy he doesn't deserve. She looked away. Think of this as an early wedding gift from me to you. Aegon's lips brushed the outer lobe of her ear. Do what must be done. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. A red haze fell over her vision as she gazed upon the foul thing sprawled before them and thought of the dark deeds he'd done. Remember, he gave our family none. And what do we give our enemies? Fire and blood, she whispered. Aegon's grin was borderline euphoric. He clapped his hands. That's my auntie. The mountain whined and wheezed for an end to his torment. Please. Daenerys took a deep breath ... Then she gripped the knife in hand. 3 quick steps carried her forward. A trembling arm rose. Gregor tried to say something, to beg for mercy he didn't deserve. Daenerys showed him none. She stabbed down into his stomach, then his groin. What passed for his chest, now. She stabbed down again, delighting in the whimper that followed. Not deep thrusts by any means, not enough to kill him outright, but to make him bleed. This man ... no, this monster deserved no less. Blood spattered her face. Another stab. Screams filled the cell. A fine gift indeed. She's fond of you. Oh, hush. Have you considered her proposal? That's what it is, isn't? Marriage. I've never been married, even before. A slip of the tongue, uncle. Don't mind me. Banter. The word bounded about Naruto's brain like a mad hare as he sprawled in the grass and stared up at the stars. Did he dare? The heavens held no answers for him. Not tonight. Instead, that infernal word persisted, tearing his thoughts to bloody pieces. Should he accept? By the sage, did he even want to? He'd never been married before, not even in his first life. There had been a moment when he thought he might have found someone, that things worked out, but they never did. And so he found himself here, with no experience on a terribly risky venture with no idea of what lay in store. He knew he wasn't right in the head these days, not completely, but even so, he found himself at a loss. If you were going to marry someone, you should love them. Shouldn't you? That was the absolute basic of the basics. Did he love Daenerys? He felt he could, given time and the chance to know her. She'd suffered through an awful lot, but she hadn't let it break her. She was mad too, she just didn't realize it yet. Every Targaryen was, in their own way. Some were simply better about it than others. They were all fixated on their own dreams, their own goals. Hers was the Iron Throne. His was vengeance against House Lannister, the monsters who had stolen away his second life and any chance of peace he might have had beforehand. But afterward, well, there had to be an after, for both of them. He idly conjured a racing shuriken to his hand just to make sure he still could, held it there for a moment, then lobbed it into the ocean. It arced gracefully into the waves, then vanished into the depths. The short, sharp act of violence brought him little peace. With a sigh, he craned his neck backward. What do you think? Should I marry her? Ankalagan rumbled from where he lay beside him, low and deep in his throat, a bass note to rumble the cliffs. Right, you've not properly met her yet, have you? An idea dawned and he grinned, pausing to scratch his head. We'll fix that tomorrow. Where had Aegon wandered off to now? The dawn had come, and with it, the forgotten prince had vanished once more. Daenerys might have found it amusing if her nephew weren't so damnably skilled at hiding. Sometimes it seemed Aegon could only be found when he wanted to be. At others he simply vanished, often for hours at a time, wandering off to do gods knew what. She had thought to find him up here on the cliffs again today as she had yesterday, but alas, he was nowhere to be seen. Wind tugged at her hair as she turned her gaze to the clouds. She could glimpse Drogon and her children wheeling out high above the waves from here fighting over something they'd caught, but there was no sign of Ankalagan among them. In all likelihood he'd probably flown off in search of food. So where had his master gone? A faint cry was her only warning. Her gaze snapped up. Ankalagan hurtled out of the clouds overhead not a heartbeat later, a dark meteor with both wings tucked flat against his sides as he dove. His roar rattled the world. In an instant she understood. He must have been gliding only a moment ago. Small wonder she'd not heard him. As she looked on, he spread his wingspan once more and let a thermal lift him upward before beating the air with ponderous majesty. Even at this distance, the wind from his wings assailed her like a hurricane. She glimpsed a shock of pale hair atop the dragon's broad back before he swept in. He landed with a mighty crunch, and that seemed to rattle Dragonstone itself. His bright eyes saw her, and she in turn saw them narrow. Oh dear. The greater dragon lumbered forward, slowly at first, then with speed. Daenerys felt her heart skip a beat. No, surely not. He wouldn't dare. He absolutely would. Ankalagan surged forward on all fours, opened his mighty jaws, and roared right in her face, a cry so loud it left her ears ringing and eyes watering. It seemed to go on, as though he intended to deafen the very wood itself. An ugly pang of realization struck her then, as she rocked back on her heels. Was this how she appeared to others when she rode Drogon? How terrifying she must seem when she sat atop his back. She'd never once given thought to how others might see her. Now she had a taste of their fear, and she found it rather unpleasant. The roar cut off abruptly, leaving Daenerys reeling. But those jaws didn't close, not for a moment. Ankalagan snarled at her, baring countless teeth for her to see. She glimpsed a tongue of fire simmering in the back of that massive throat. Oh gods, he was going to burn her alive. It should have terrified her. Yet she only felt a strange, eerie calm. So be it. She'd come this far. If this was to be her end, she would face it head on. Daenerys raised an ungloved hand, then held it up before the dragon's face to touch his snout. Ankalagan could have snapped that hand clean off, bit it right in half with her arm, and the rest of her besides. She wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. Instead, he inhaled deeply, drawing her forward. His growl became a pleased trill as his pupils dilated. Abruptly, he shoved his snout into her chest, forcing her to catch his snout or be bowled over entirely. The faint smell of fire and smoke assaulted her senses, and she released a short, shuddering breath, trying to control her hammering heart. Good boy. Naruto watched the singular scene unfold atop Ankalagan's back. A broad smile split his whiskered face from ear to ear. He'd left it to his old friend to decide, and so he had. That settled it, his doubts. She was a keeper. Marriage it was, then. Aegon slid down off his back to land beside Daenerys, grinning like a madman. Which he probably was, the daft bastard. He likes you. She laughed a little and let the black behemoth go, nearly broken by the experience. How do you know? Her nephew tapped one hand to his scared skull. He would have eaten you otherwise. She granted him a scathing glare. You were certain he wouldn't. Fairly. He shrugged one shoulder. He wanted to get the measure of you, probably. And if you tried to eat me, I wouldn't let him. The way he said with such assurance, she almost believed him. No need to worry about that now. Look. He laughed as the giant dragon laid down beside them with a pleased rumble. You've clearly impressed him. You'll get along just fine. Aren't you afraid of losing control of him? Control. The broken prince scoffed and walked past her, lingering on the edge of the cliff. What control? The idea that we control the dragons is an illusion. It's a partnership. He looked out to sea and heard dragons beyond. For you there, you children. For me, well. He chuckled, looked back to Ankalagan and scratched the beast's snout. I guess you could call Ankalagan my brother. He doesn't speak, but he reminds me of an old friend. Her brow furrowed. A dragon. It's a long story. His face closed down. I'll tell you about it sometime. Silence stretched between them. Belatedly, it occurred to her that she ought to ask Aegon for his answer if he had agreed to her offer. So much hinged on his cooperation. He had the potential to make things very difficult, impossible even, for her if he took it into his head to strike out on his own. Moreover, she was curious to see what he would say. I accept. He beat her to the punch once again. The rascal. Daenerys felt her heart skip a beat despite herself. I beg your pardon. Your proposal. He pivoted back to face her in his entirety, smiling softly. If you'll still have me. Oh, are you certain? She nearly cursed herself for the slip, but her tongue defied her regardless. This isn't something you can take back. He stepped to her and took her hands in his, idly tracing her knuckles with one calloused thumb. I'm sure. Oh gods, why did her face feel so warm? She rather liked the way his had fit in hers. No. Bad girl. Focus. With this, their causes were united as one. They would face Westeros together. So why did she feel so restless? She should have been thinking about the Iron Throne, yet in this moment she found his thoughts broken and disjointed. It felt rather nice, knowing she wasn't alone in the world anymore. So what if her only other known relative was a little mad? He wasn't a screaming lunatic like her father, nor was he a sniveling coward. Here was someone who would stand beside her, not in front of nor behind her. An equal. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had one of those, not in the truest sense of the word ... not since Drogo. Could she learn to love Aegon as she had him? She found him pleasant enough company, if a bit wild. But he didn't know. She couldn't have children. She'd have to tell him, and soon. Mercifully, he released her hands and stepped backwards to his dragon. Care for a race. Daenerys arched a pale brow. I'm not sure that would be wise. Wise, she says. Huh. Aegon laughed happily as he climbed atop Ankalagan. Who said anything about being wise? This is meant to be fun. She stared at him for a long moment until, at length, he sighed. Don't be a stick in the mud. You'll be glad of moments like these when you're queen. You know. You'll have precious little time for them in the future. Ankalagan swiveled his massive head to look at her again in agreement. Aegon grinned. Afraid you'll lose, your grace. The spark of competition kindled within her bosom. I didn't say that. Then you have nothing to fear. He slung himself into the saddle. Her gaze met his. Her intended didn't budge. Not one bit. Go ahead, he grinned. Call Drogon. We'll wait. Tyrion considered himself a wise man. Not the strongest and certainly not the tallest, but wise. Yes, wise enough. He drank and he knew things. Well, perhaps less so the drinking these days. Still, he prided himself on reading between the lines, seeing things before others could, anticipating the actions of both allies and enemies alike. And this boded poorly. Yes, most poorly indeed. He had seen them together for several days now, Daenerys and Aegon, holding hands, talking to one another, conversing. They had flown away together some time ago, racing across the cliffs. Aegon had won said race most handily, but it was what came after that concerned him. They'd flown out across Blackwater and not returned for some time. When they finally did, they looked smug about something. Could dragons look smug? Theirs certainly had. It soon became something of an open secret in the days that followed. They spent much time together as their armies massed, preparing. Granted, the unlikely duo slept apart and hadn't shown any outward signs of affections. But still, the rest of the council began to take notice of it. Now, in all fairness, Tyrion wasn't privy to what they were thinking. Their queen had not shared her plans with them, but he could make an educated guess. It was precisely said guess that alarmed him. The realm did not have the fondest memory of the Targaryens to begin with, not after the horrid insanity of the Mad King. And yet here two of his kin were, openly consorting with one another. The knowledge was suppressed for now, but once they began moving their forces across the rest of Westeros, that would soon chance. Oh, yes, this could go very poorly, very quickly. He finally dared to broach the subject come breakfast one morning. I understand congratulations are in order. Daenerys shot him a withering look, set down her fork, cleaned her lips with a napkin and took a deep breath. Her face became a curious study of contrasts. They are, well, Olenna tutted at her. Don't keep us in suspense. Daenerys pushed her chair back, took a deep breath, stood to address them all. I will marry. Silence ruled over them all. My nephew, she finished. Lord Aegon Targaryen. Oberyn's smile was just a shade short of smug. And when did you decide this? Several days ago. She lifted her chin ever so slightly, as though daring him to defy her claim. Tyrion glimpsed a mulish glint in her eye. It was the best way to bind him and his dragon to our cause. Not the only way, Olenna laughed, but certainly the most enjoyable for the two of you. She winked her way, utterly without shame. You Targaryens always did have strange tastes. I suppose it's better than a brother marrying their sister. Tyrion nearly laughed despite his own anxiety. He choked it down. She had no fear at all. This woman, no, that wasn't it. Olenna no longer had anything left to lose. Her family was dead, her legacy in ashes, vengeance all that remained. The Tyrell line would die with her. That made her quite dangerous indeed. Lack of fear made for an intractable foe. Do you object to this course of action? Oh no, not at all. The Tyrell matriarch granted her a wry smile. I nearly found myself married to a dragon once, you know. The stories I could tell you. Her wrinkled face softened for a moment and her eyes grew distant, as though she were somewhere far from here, somewhere better. Perhaps she saw her granddaughter, then her gaze hardened and the moment was lost. But I think not. No, I chose who I wanted. As have you, it seems. Their queen seemed to take strength from that. She would not be swayed, not on this matter, perhaps not ever. But why? Why go out of her way to establish relations with someone who, by all rights, claimed to be mad? Yes, he had a rather large dragon, but she had 3, and they had several armies. Why would she? Realization struck him in a horrific thunderbolt. Of course, how could he have missed it? She was fond of Aegon. And he, her. He had seen love blossom on battlefields before. And this was war. Passion sparked, it might well be only a matter of time. But would it end in disaster? Their cause balanced on a knife's edge. To fall one way promised victory, the other doom. He let his gaze roam about the table, trying to get the measure of the rest of the council. Oberyn was grinning fit to burst, secretly pleased. The Dornish were well and truly bound to Daenerys now. Varys seemed inclined to agree with their queen, no doubt thinking it best for the realm, while Olenna had already said her piece. Yara didn't seem to much care one way or another, but then again she was Ironborn, who could tell her thoughts one way or the other, and then she surprised them all. I don't see what the problem is. If they want to have it one another, let them. Daenerys coughed into her wine. Oberyn barked a laugh. A woman after my own heart. Sorry, she smirked back at him, you're not quite my type. The Red Viper only laughed harder. Tyrion nearly despaired at it all. Was he the only one who saw the danger here? The realm had revolted against the Targaryens once before. If faced with more same, they would surely do so again. Their hope lay in the hands of Daenerys, not this mad boy who was so eager to burn their enemies. Olenna saved him from asking the question nearest and dearest to his heart. And where is our dear prince? A mighty roar rattled the castle from top to bottom. He saw it then, the ghost of a smile upon their queen's face. I suspect he'll be joining us shortly. It was too much. He had to say something. My queen, are you sure this is wise? I do not think I know, she interjected, rendering his protest moot. He would happily burn half the countryside. And as I said before, she countered, I am not here to be queen of the ashes. So you say. Olenna tutted in mild disapproval. I'll say to now what I did then. How do you mean to take the Iron Throne if you restrain yourself? The doors burst open. Restraint. A familiar voice intoned. Who said anything about restraint? Aegon certainly cut a fearsome sight in that black armor of his. He didn't so much walk as he did stalk to the queen's side. There was a high, wild look in his eye, one that Tyrion found himself shying away from. The boy might well become a second Meager at this rate. He could understand the appeal, of course, the carrot and the sick, the velvet glove ... or the iron fist beneath it. When faced with a massive beast like Ankalagan, the offer of peace would certainly seem most appealing. He must have been out scouting. Wait, what did he have there in his hand? Nephew. Daenerys smiled for him. So nice of you to join us, Aunt. He didn't smile back, but instead thumped the sack down on the table and ripped the coarse cloth away. Revealed was a severed head for all to see, its face frozen in final moments of agony. Tyrion had no idea who the poor bastard was, and didn't have time to ascertain his identity, because the prince was already speaking. The Lannisters are marching on Highgarden tomorrow. The Tarleys have betrayed us. Daenerys merely arched an eyebrow. Have they now? That was rather unwise. Greed got the better of them. This one sang like a canary once I used a bit of fire. Tyrion felt his jaw click open. Of course the Tarleys had turned their coats. The utter fools. Olenna sighed under her breath. They would be under Randall's leadership, then. I hadn't thought him that stupid. Yes, Tyrion thought it was spectacularly stupid, and he knew precisely how their queen and her intended would answer. He'd not forgotten the motto of their house. How could he? Fire and blood. They would unleash the dragons to reach Highgarden in time, and in doing so, all hell would break loose. As fate would have it, Tyrion was both very, very wrong, and very right. I'm tired of it all, Dany. Tired of being good. Tired of letting them off the hook, of letting them scheme. Tired of always taking the high ground. Tired of doing the right thing. So let me tell, here's what I'm gonna do. Fire and blood. The Tarleys have betrayed us. Daenerys nearly despaired when she heard the words. Nearly being the operative word. They'd prepared for just such an eventuality. Really, treachery was to be expected in war. Still, for it to happen now of all times ... how very vexing. Randall Tarley was something of a known quantity to Olenna, not so much an opportunity as a pragmatist. He certainly hadn't hesitated to turn his coat after being called to King's Landing. Never much like the man myself, the Queen of Thrones muttered as she fussed over the map. Too hidebound. I had high hopes for that son of his, but it seems he's content to follow his father into an early grave. Let's see now. There. A wrinkled finger traced the line from Dragonstone to the Reach. They've already stolen a march on us. You'll have a hard ride ahead of you if mean to intercept them. And you'd best do it quickly. If they mean to sack my home for its wealth and resources, they are sorely mistaken. Why would they do such a thing? Oberyn frowned and took a hearty bite of his apple. To pay of their debt to the Iron Bank, I suspect. This from Varys. One way or another, they always get their due. So it would seem. Perhaps we should have met with them first. Too late for that now, I'm afraid. Came the rejoinder. Our friends will undoubtedly reach Highgarden before us. Not on Dragonbeck they won't. Aegon tutted, peering over her shoulder. Ankalagan and I can reach Highgarden in time to warn them ... and stall said friends. Daenerys shot her nephew a quelling look, not liking the smile he wore. You will do no such thing. I forbid it. Why? He turned a quizzical look upon her. We can fly faster than you and Drogon. That's a fact. Surely that's foolish. Tyrion put in. Without an army, you'll be putting yourself in harm's way. For some reason, that made the forgotten son laugh. I've been in harm's way from the moment I was born. What's a little risk now? Let me buy you some time. Daenerys waved her Dothraki advisor closer. How soon can your men ride? Within the hour, Khaleesi. ... Make it so. She took a deep breath to calm herself and counted her blessings. Calm, she must be calm. This was still salvageable. At Prince Oberyn's behest they had stopped in Sunspear to collect the Dornish army before landing on Dragonstone, which saved them the trouble of sailing back round the coast. Now it was the Tyrells who were in danger, easily remedied. Yara had already raced down to the docks to rally her ships. A journey by sea would take less time than land, but it would still be hard sailing. If only they could catch the Lannisters in a pincer. If only they had more time. If only. But they were all looking to her for answers and she'd best give them. It is as my nephew says. Our armies won't arrive in time to stop their march, but we can prevent them from making off with their spoils. She noticed Aegon's pleased look and pointedly refused to look at him. I shall lead the Dothraki against the Lannisters. The Unsullied and Dornish armies will remain here to defend Dragonstone. When neither Oberyn nor Grey Worm protested, she turned her gaze to Missandei. Should the king in the north arrive during our absence, please grant him our hospitality. Her dearest friend bowed, all smiles. Of course, your grace. Aegon nudged her with an elbow and coughed pointedly. And guessed right, of course. In the meantime, they wanted her to be a dragon. She would be a dragon. Just this once. He was really doing this. Words were one thing, but here Aegon was, actively committing himself to their cause. Were he anyone else, Daenerys would have given her nephew a good hard shake and shouted him down for good measure. Instead, she could only watch helplessly as he readied himself and Ankalagan on the shoreline. Waves lapped at their feet as he made his preparations, adjusting the saddle, making certain he'd packed enough provisions on his personage, adjusting his armor, and the like. It all felt like an eternity when in truth it only took a few minutes. Every second counted. It was easy to appear brave before her council. She could hide her fear there. Not here. Not here. While she watched her nephew prepare to throw himself into the fray once more. He would be risking life and limb out there, alone, for some time. How she wished she could fly out with him. She wanted to. She truly did, but that was reckless, even for her. She had no armor to speak of a matter which she swore to see rectified. And even Drogon couldn't conquer an army alone. No, she would be flying after Aegon and Ankalagan with her army, though it galled her to no end. Simply put, the duo could cover more ground alone, without her slowing them down. This was the first and last time she would be a burden to them. So she swore, "You needn't buy much time, only enough." She cautioned him, "Be careful, and don't attack them outright." Aegon grunted and made to sling himself into the saddle. Dany growled and caught at his arm. In return, he pivoted on one heel and sketched a smarmy bow, one arm out to his side. "As my queen commands." A blonde brow rose. "You're not going to be careful at all, are you?" "I'll be careful enough." Daenerys felt her temper flare. Aegon Naruto was a year older than her, perhaps more. She knew this, yet why did she feel as if she were the only adult between them sometimes? It must be that irascible confidence of his. Despite his quick temper, he moved with a surety of purpose, never once doubting himself. Even now, with the gamble he was about to undertake, he showed no fear. Well, good for him. She, on the other hand, was feeling an awful lot of fear and terribly cross for it. "Don't look at me like that." His words drew her forth from maudlin thoughts and she pivoted to find him wearing a wry smile. "I won't die." "How can you be so certain?" She hated the tremor in her voice. "Because I promised to marry you." He granted her a wry smile. "And I keep my promises. A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing, you know. So I'll come back." A hand settled on her shoulder, followed by another to hold her steady. "Every time. Here and now, I'll make you another promise." Belatedly, she realized how close they were standing to one another. Aegon closed the gap and leaned forward, forehead touching hers, voice dropping to a low whisper. "No matter where I go, no matter how many battles I may fight." His hands shifted, reaching down now to clasp her palms in his. "I promise to never die and leave you alone in this world." It was such a simple oath, impossible even, and yet it sparked something in her. Come closer, please." Aegon complied. The very moment he did, Daenerys grabbed him by the face, yanked him in, and kissed him soundly on the lips. Her intended stiffened in surprise, but only for a moment. Then he reciprocated, grabbing her in return, pulling her even closer, lips seeking hers with a startling hunger. She angled her head to deepen the kiss and a low growl rumbled in his throat. It surprised her, both that Aegon would be so passionate, and that she'd enjoy it so. And she did. Very much so. Very, very much indeed. His kisses warmed her blood and set her heart ablaze. In his arms, the rest of the world ceased to be. She stopped thinking about the battle, about the Iron Throne, about anything but the young man lavishing attention on her lips, and now her cheek, followed by her neck and ... Oh dear, she really was growing rather warm. Now wasn't the time for such things. There was a battle to be fought. They should stop. They really ought to. This was reckless. This was foolish. This might well get them both killed. But she couldn't remember the last time someone had evoked these sort of feelings in her. Her kissed her lips again and she arched against him with a pleased noise, throwing both arms around his neck. Ankalagan made an impatient noise above them. It roused Daenerys from her pleasant haze. Mastering herself, she took a deep breath and drew away to catch her breath. Aegon's arm was an iron bar around her waist, holding her close, preventing her from going too far. Daenerys found herself grateful for it, if only because it gave her an excuse to hold on to him in return. He looked just as flustered as she felt. Even now she could hear her heart bounding in her ears. Her blood was up, her dragon temper roused. Tyrells? What about the Tyrells? She wanted to tear that armor off him, drive him to the ground, take him now, and ride him into oblivion. ... But she couldn't do such things. Not here, not with so many eyes upon them. How infuriating it was sometimes, being a Targaryen. All right, she gasped the word out, beat back her desire, and stubbornly pressed her head to Aegon's chest. All right, ... We'd best stop for now. She could feel her council watching from the bluffs, Olenna's approval, Oberyn's sardonic amusement and Tyrion's gentle reproach. It would be hours before she saw her intended again. Perhaps even a day. Suddenly, it felt like an eternity. Do not die. She glared up at him, face flushed. I forbid it. He kissed her forehead. Not a chance. She kissed him right back. Tyrion palmed his face. This is going to end poorly. And you are so certain of this. Oberyn granted him a questing look. They have a chance. It is not for us to say what will come of it. Have some faith. Together, they watched the prince climb atop his dragon. Ankalagan righted himself with a ponderous groan and lumbered forward on all fours, raising his wings as he went. In a matter of moments both boy and beast were aloft, streaking away into the clouds. Another moment and they were lost from sight entirely. Tyrion sighed. Faith, Oberyn said. Well ... One could hope. Ankalagan flew like the wind. Naruto luxuriated in it. He loved this. The wind in his hair, the sun on his face, clouds whipping past like so much mist. Complete and utter freedom of movement as his heart hammered in his chest. They were making good time, no. Excellent time. Ankalagan had surprised even him with his speed. An army could only move so fast, limited as they were by terrain, supply lines, and human endurance. Dragons knew no such limits. They had raced through the sky at breakneck speed for the better part of an hour now, the horizon hurtling by in a mottled blue-on-white blur. He reveled in it all. Faster they flew, everything barreling by, until quite suddenly, there it was. Or rather, there they were. Burn them all, a familiar voice hissed in his ear. It's what they deserve. He shoved it away with the patience of a man who'd long since lost his mind. Such a little thought, such a tempting one. Naruto wanted to. Oh yes, he did, more than anything. Simply burn the army below and be done with it ... But he'd promised not to. Even in this warped second life of his, he held to that creed. Clung to it really, because it was one of the few things keeping him from truly going off the deep end. Some things were still sacred to him. Besides, butchering the Lannister army and the Reach traders in one swoop wouldn't be fun. They couldn't see him through the thick cloud cover, couldn't hear Ankalagan coming, gliding as he was now on silent wings. But he could hear them, sense them, see them even, marching toward Highgarden in their neat little rows. He might not have Kurama in this life, but he still had most of his gifts. Enhanced vision was only one of them. They were but mice to him, blissfully unaware of the hawk wheeling overhead, ignorant of the danger, until its sharp talons closed around them. And this, it would be the perfect ambush. He wondered what their screams would sound like. The enemy didn't know about Ankalagan ... or him, for that matter. Another gaze below now, as he considered his plan of attack. The Reach was beautiful to be sure with its rolling grassy plains, but it lacked something. Something terribly important. Cover. They were utterly out in the open down there. It was so tempting to just swoop down on them and burn them to ash ... So very tempting. They would be dead before they truly knew what hit them. But that wouldn't satisfy him. Let the Lannister army have their scorpions. If they thought those piddly pea-shooters would stop Ankalagan, they were in for a nasty surprise. A low rumble rattled his body, distracting him from such pleasant thoughts. I know. He looked down and gave Ankalagan a brisk pat. In many ways, he reminded him of Kurama. We promised not to attack before Dany got here, remember? And wasn't she someone to think about? He'd never had a kiss quite like that before. She'd ignited a fire in him, one he'd thought long since dead. If that was what their marriage was going to be like, then he very much looked forward to it. His dear friend, one of the few he trusted, made a sullen noise and he commiserated with him. Although a wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, no one once said anything about scaring them or defending ourselves if they attacked us. Ankalagan realized his intention a second before he acted and angled his massive body downward. Naruto pressed himself flat against the saddle and held on for dear life. No one heard his war cry save Ankalagan. Banza. Together, they dive-bombed them. Death burst through the clouds. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.